Right.
Over 20 years ago, I'm in Central Park in New York, and I see a play, and I meet this unbelievably smart and beautiful actress.
Oh.
And sorry. And we have a great time together. You know, she performed Shakespeare for me. She gets to watch as I take care of a homeless man having a grand mal seizure later that night. And then 2 days later, she moves away to Texas for a year.
Right.
And we started writing to each other. And all I knew is that she was going to Texas because her equally brilliant sister had created a children's television show, and she was going to act in it. And the only other detail I knew is that one of her best friends from college, Mo Rocca, was going to be writing for that show as well.
I love that that's where our friendship began, because that was an amazing experience, and that was Wishbone.
Right. Wishbone, the Jack Russell Terrier who read classics of literature and then imagined himself as the protagonist.
In order to familiarize kids between the ages of 6 and 11 with the themes of those books so that when they encounter them later on, they find them less daunting.
Yes,
that was the mission statement of Wishbone.
And I believe the creator of Wishbone is here tonight. Stephanie Simpson is in the crowd.
Yeah.
As is that fantastically beautiful actress who I married. Jeannie Simpson is here as well. So we became fast friends. You want to tell everybody what episodes of Wishbone you wrote?
Yeah, I wrote The Prince and the Pooch, which was based on The Prince and the Pauper.
Right.
I wrote one for Treasure Island.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah, that worked out well. And then H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and then one on Mexican folktales and legends. And then the last one was on Gogol's Inspector General. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jeannie was in that one too, wasn't she?
She was, yeah.
She was. She was very
And
funny.
you know, this is, I have to say that it's in all the jobs I've had, I really mean this. I keep going back to Wishbone, and any talent I have for telling a story, that is, my toolbox is from Wishbone. Because we were
really young.
Well, that's
and
right.
learning this stuff.
Yeah, and I also, and breaking down, reducing, not dumbing down, reducing great works of literature to 30 minutes through the eyes of starring a Jack Russell Terrier for kids was storytelling boot camp. It really was amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember that, you know, you got to do it from New York, so you got the best.
Right, I got to visit Texas and do it from New York. You lived in Texas.
I lived in Plano, which means flat in Spanish, and it was really flat. And
in so many ways.
Right, it was. And we would have these focus groups of kids to watch. I think it was, were they watching Rough Cuts? I can't remember. But what I do remember is that, you know, kids are so smart in watching TV that if you mark time, if you just fill it with characters just talking and the plot isn't moving forward, they get bored right away. So it was a great way to learn how to tell a story that keeps moving.
Keeps momentum going.
Yeah.
It's boggling to me that in this era of peak television that there hasn't been a Wishbone reboot yet.
I know.
Yeah.
Stephanie, can we make that happen?
Make it happen, Steph.
Stephanie
Stephanie's working on so many things right now, but I would love to see that. Now, we became fast friends. We've been friends for all this time. We shared an office together on the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss, also as Stephanie Simpson joined.
Right.
And we were not the best. We had a great time, but we were kind of an odd couple as office mates.
Well, maybe because you write very quickly, and to hear like clackety clack constantly, it's really unnerving if you're sitting there pulling your hair out and trying to write
you're
something.
You're a hair puller, and I just lost my hair.
Right. Okay. Yeah, but that was a great experience, and that was a kids show where it was Muppet versions of Seuss characters, of Dr. Seuss characters, and they kind of were like oil and water because Dr. Seuss is, you know, kind of all heart. Dr. Seuss is very cerebral and is in the head, and the Muppets are all warm and heart. And
it was really hard to marry
water.
those two. Now, the only reason I brought that, I brought that up because I like reminiscing with you, but it was right after that you started with The Daily Show, and I went to I started doing an unsuccessful NPR show called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I think we both did that in 1998. And the rest is history. But I'll festoon more of this biographical stuff later. But I want to get to your book, which I recently completed reading. And I think Mobituaries, the podcast and the book, is at the moment peak Mo Rocca. It's like my favorite thing that you've ever done.
Thank you very much.
Because for one, since the day I met you, I knew that you were just a fact-crazy individual. Like you could name all the first ladies, all the presidential pets. It was all these little areas that you were so interested in.
Right.
And you brought that to a lot of the stuff that you've done over the years.
It's just an information dump, right?
Right.
Okay.
You love doing that. And, but the other thing is, Mobituaries has so much of that, but it also has, the genuine warmth and heart that we see in a show like My Grandmother's Ravioli.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I wanted to do with this, and what I over the years maybe gained more of the confidence to do, is be interested in what I'm interested in, and know that if I'm really interested in it and I execute it well enough, right? And I think you understand this.
Yeah.
People will come along for the ride.
That's right.
Yeah, I used to go around. When I was on The Daily Show, I would do gigs on campuses, and I had a slideshow I would do of my travels around to different presidential homes and grave sites. And I was really into the obscure presidents, the ones between Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt, with all the facial hair. They're usually from Ohio. A couple of them were knocked off by assassins. And
several were overweight.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, sure. I mean, Grover Cleveland and Chester Alan Arthur. Yeah. And I found, I found that, my hunch is that if you had told any of the kids at these campuses before they walked into the auditorium that that's what they would be watching, they wouldn't have wanted to come in and watch it.
Right.
But I was so into it, and really into the stories of the kind of docents that I would meet at these obscure sites.
Yeah, you were like a docent whisperer.
I love a good docent. I love a good docent.
And you put them on all the time.
Yeah, I love my docents. I met a docent named Wanda Wheeler, who was volunteering full time at the Benjamin Harrison House on Delaware Avenue in the old North Side section of Indianapolis.
See?
And this woman was so committed to Benjamin Harrison. I trailed along with a group of second graders who were visiting that day, and by the end, we all wanted to sandblast Mount Rushmore and replace it with Benjamin Harrison.
Wow.
She was that good at what she did.
Yeah, because nowadays, once you got outside of that house, the spell must have broken, and you realize that he wouldn't be on your Mount Rushmore.
He really wouldn't. I mean, he was said to have had a handshake like a wilted petunia. Ugh. Ugh, that just grosses me out.
Oh, that's awful. That. Yeah. Now, as long as you bring that up, Mount Rushmore, that made me flash to something in your book, because in your book, you love making lists.
Love lists and rankings.
You have two alternate Mount Rushmores in your book. One is for pre-presidential careers, the Mount Rushmore pre-presidents, and the Mount Rushmore of post-presidents.
Yeah, I mean, everybody,
And obviously Jimmy Carter is on the post-presidential.
Right. Everybody loves to talk about how Jimmy Carter, right, is an amazing post-president. But I was really drawn to this idea of, the book, Mobituaries, and the podcast is, memorializes things that I don't think got the send-off they deserved. And it's a very flexible, conveniently flexible format.
It's wonderfully flexible.
I know, right?
I have so many suggestions for you for
good. Keep them coming. And I thought, no one talks about pre-presidencies, and
it's true.
The pre-presidency, it's like preseason ball. It doesn't matter. Once you're in the White House, that's what counts. And I knew vaguely about Herbert Hoover,
right?
And you learn about him in the musical Annie, and that he's, that everyone's living in Hoovervilles, and.
There's a very bitter song.
Yeah,
I might have learned sarcasm from that. Yeah, we'd like to thank you, Herbert. We don't want to thank him.
We don't want to thank him. No. But he was the great humanitarian.
Yeah.
He was, when World War I broke out, 120,000 Americans were stranded in Europe, and he was a private citizen and used the operational know-how he'd gained from being a leader in engineering to get all those Americans home. And then he managed to negotiate as a one-man State Department with both the British government and the German government before the U.S. got involved in World War I to get relief supplies that saved an estimated 10 million Northern Europeans. So this guy was extraordinary. And I just have to say, he then became Secretary of Commerce before he'd even said whether he was a Democrat or Republican. So he was this great sort of unifying figure, and he standardized so much of American life.
Now, I love this bit, and I know you write in a book that people aren't interested in standardization. I'm totally interested in
Right.
standardization. Talk for a second about what he did.
Well, there were the construction industry had 66 different sizes of bricks, which didn't really make a lot of sense. He standardized it so that there would be one. There were 42 different sizes of milk bottles that the dairy industry had. And can you imagine going to the grocery store and calling home and saying to Jeannie, do you want like the 17 ounce or the 14 ounce or the 33 ounce or whatever? I mean,
I just imagined it and got annoyed.
and he made it so that there would be 4, pint, quart, half gallon, and gallon. And this saved consumers and it saved manufacturers. And he made uniform the 3-colored traffic signal, right? And so
he did?
Yeah.
I don't think I remember seeing that detail in your book.
Right. Well, it's
I must have skimmed.
God, did I just make that up? No. Anyway, but but before that, red meant stop in one place and red meant go in another. So people were probably just crashing into each other all the time before Herbert Hoover.
Wow. Thank you for taking a detour into standard. I genuinely am a fan. Like, if you ever get a chance, Neil Stephenson once wrote a wonderful long essay about the history of the container shipping industry and how standardizing container shipping changed the planet.
I would like to read that.
You should read that.
But I also want us to unironically sing, "We'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover."
Yes, wouldn't that be nice? We could just do a song parody, change the lyrics, and sing about his pre-presidential career. Now, and I know his great-granddaughter?
Great-granddaughter.
Maggie Hooves.
Right, exactly. That's her hip-hop name, Margaret Hoover. And I interviewed her for a piece I did on Herbert Hoover, and she said, this is a guy who lived 90 years and is judged for 4 of them. And I thought it was interesting. Now, he wasn't a great president, but
he got dealt a bad hand.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
The other thing about Hoover, before we leave him, is that he did the same thing he did in before World War I for the 1927 flood. Yeah,
this huge, crazy, horrible, catastrophic flood of the Mississippi River, and he was the go-to person, and the relief operation was really hailed, and so it was inevitable that he would become the Republican nominee and win the election.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about the flood. He was kind of the anti-Brownie, wasn't he? He genuinely did a heck of a job.
He did
do all that flooding.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
He did a heck of a job.
Yeah.
Without any snark. Yeah.
Now we name-checked Billy Carter. Now there's a chapter on Billy Carter in your book.
Yeah.
We name-checked Jimmy Carter.
Right.
There's a chapter on his younger brother, Billy, in the book. And I didn't know half of that stuff.
Well, so I kind of think that presidential families are like regular families on steroids.
Yeah.
I mean, all the things, the dynamics that we recognize in ordinary families are, really magnified in presidential families. And there's this long history of unruly, ne'er-do-well presidential brothers. And they go way back to John Quincy Adams' brother, Charles, who was called a madman possessed by the devil. He was called that by their father, John Adams. And
let me just put an asterisk there, because after the Herbert Hoover thing, you do post-presidential, and there's a John Quincy Adams chapter that's fantastic.
Well, right, because he has an
unbelievably great post-presidential career.
Yeah, and I'd never seen the movie Amistad, so I did
Oh,
not
you hadn't?
I did not know that story before this.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And he had an extraordinary post-presidency. But with Billy Carter and Roger Clinton, Bill Clinton's half-brother, his code name from the Secret Service was literally, it was Headache. That was his code name.
Roger Clinton's was?
Yes, he was such a pain. Yes.
Awesome.
And then Neil Bush, cost taxpayers $1.3 billion of Silverado savings and loan. But Billy is sort of right? You remember Billy. We're the same age.
Remember. I was a kid, and I remember that we all laughed at kind of what a redneck cock-up Billy Carter was. He launched Billy Beer.
Right, which was
terrible. Reputedly a terrible beer, and you own a 6-pack of it.
I own a 6-pack of it, and I have a 12-pack box. And Dan Rather told me that even the dogs wouldn't drink it. It was so bad. But he said it in a much folksier way than I just did right now.
But the thing I didn't know, which you taught me through this book, is that a lot of his floundering around in the media eye was Jimmy's fault.
Well, yeah, because
he was running the peanut farm.
Right, because they had this business in Plains, Georgia, a very small town in southwest Georgia. The international media descends on this town. And then this business that Billy, who was 13 years younger than Jimmy, that Billy thought he would take over one day, the business goes into a blind trust. I know it's quaint at this point, the idea, but it goes into a blind trust when his older brother becomes president. Billy didn't ask for this to happen. And so the way he chooses to make his living is being Billy Carter. So he becomes a cartoon. He goes on Hee Haw. He does belly flop contests. He makes personal appearances all over the place, acting really foolish. He eventually starts...
I assumed that was the end of him. Right. My assumption was that he must have fallen into a Thresher drunk and that was it. But there's more to the story.
There is more.
He does turn it around.
Well, you remember the Libyans, right?
Yes.
That he gets, yes,
I just remember the Libyans. Thank you.
Let's remember the Libyans. And he gets into business with the Libyans. Look, there's no excusing that, and his brother...
No, there's zero excuse.
No, there's no... Exactly. And his brother, and when I interviewed the president, he loves his brother, but he was also a little unsentimental about certain aspects.
Right, because this was after you wrote this... After you wrote the book, you've since, in preparation for an episode of Mobituaries, the podcast, you went and talked to Jimmy Carter recently.
I went and I talked to Jimmy Carter about this, and he said, I'm happy to talk to you about this because I love my brother, and he said a lot of the things that I had learned beforehand, that Billy really was incredibly hardworking, and that the farmers in that area really trusted him and liked dealing with him, that he was a voracious reader. But, you know, Jimmy Carter, towards the end of his one term in the White House, was being challenged for the renomination by Ted Kennedy. So humiliating challenge. You know, the economy is in a spiral. There are hostages in Iran. And then he has to conduct a 1-hour-long primetime news conference explaining to the country why his little brother is meddling in the Middle East. I mean, it's like, it is the ultimate nightmare of an embarrassing sibling. But in the midst of all that, Billy Carter admitted that he was an alcoholic, and then he spent the last proud chapter of his life crisscrossing the country, talking to people who could relate to him.
And everybody could relate to him. That was one thing about him, is he was the relatable, so relatable.
Yep. I think he helped his brother. My theory.
You think he helped his brother not get reelected?
Well, I think he helped his brother get reelected in the first place.
Oh, get elected, yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because Billy Carter, he was famous, he became famous right away, and he was very modern. If you watch, there's a piece, I don't know if it's on YouTube, where Dan Rather profiles him. And he says to Dan Rather's face, he says basically, but he's charming about it, he says, you know, TV reporters, they're just told what to say by their producers. I mean, he's like kind of a proto-populist figure, and he happens to also be likable. But anyway, he was, that's the kind of person I wanted to explore in this project, because I thought, he can't just be a cartoon. And I remembered him as a cartoon, and he was a person with a family that loved him and was a smart, hardworking, complicated guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to some of the other people that you do explore in this book. No, in fact, let's go to some of the things, because you do toss in a couple of things that are not people, and some of them are just candy for Gen Xers, I think.
Okay.
Like the station wagon.
Yeah.
Because you and I both grew up in a time when the station wagon roamed the American countryside on the interstate system with impunity.
Right.
And
did you all have one?
Oh yeah.
Which
we had Fords usually. We had an LTD.
Okay.
Which had the wood paneling, but red with wood paneling.
Nice. But, I like that.
But you use a 2-word phrase or 3-word phrase in that chapter that I think has left our lexicon, which is the way back.
The way back. Well, I love the way back. Because
Did you hear that?
Yeah, the way back. I love the way back. I mean, even though it was a death chamber, I loved it because I loved
it too. And it was a death chamber. It was.
Well, I loved.
When you went into the skid, it was the first thing that was going to swing around and hit the wall.
But I would love whenever the person driving would make a wide turn, because I love the out-of-control feeling of being thrown against the side.
Yeah.
And the way back, it was kind of like I had this fantasy that I could climb into my dryer and turn it on. I love that out-of-control feeling. I'm glad I didn't succeed in doing it. But my family only had one until I was about 3, so and it was the one thing that kind of made us like the Bradys. So I wanted a station wagon so badly again after that, and I think I became friends with kids because their families had station wagons.
We would have been friends because my family held on to the station wagon for a long time, and I was always happiest when they didn't and parents used to do this commonly, when they didn't make me fold up the seat in the way back and just let me lay down there in the way back, sometimes with the German Shepherd.
Oh, that's so great.
It was the best.
And fall asleep back there. And it's kind of funny that the station wagon, I mean, it started dying. The last one rolled off the assembly line in 2011, but in 1983, the minivan, if we can remember that, was actually seen as kind of sexy. Yeah. And that was the death knell.
Now you make a really good point that had never occurred to me, which is that you feel like the minivan and the SUV replaced the station wagon because the station wagon belongs to an era when the open roads represented freedom. Right. You want to go on about that? Or?
Yeah, I think so. And the first real station wagon was a 1949 Plymouth Suburban. I mean, right, a baby boom car.
That's a little on the nose.
Right, and the Eisenhowerian, I love that adjective, but era of like super highways and people getting out on open roads.
Eisenhowerian.
Yeah, isn't that great? I've read that somewhere. Eisenhowerian. Okay. Anyway, and the SUV, the whole appeal of it is that
you can
scale,
leave the road.
Yeah, exactly. Scale craggy peaks and get away from tornadoes and
traffic. Frankly,
traffic, right, to escape these highways that have become the bane
That's really,
of our
really
existence.
Fascinating. One more object, and you don't have a chapter about it, and you've never done a podcast about it, but I think you should. Yeah. But you name check in a very touching opening segment about in 1974, your family purchasing the World Book Encyclopedia.
Yeah. I love that I got this reaction.
It wasn't just you that had that. Now you had I don't know if you want to go into this, but you have this really funny anecdote about taking out one particular volume and checking out the same story all the time.
So I loved the 1974 World Book Encyclopedia.
I'm convinced that's the same edition I had too, by the way.
And what color was yours?
It was like brown and cream.
Mine was brown and cream, and I have all the volumes in my New York City apartment, and so you can, next time you're in New York, let's lie on our stomachs on the living room rug and page through the facts and brief for all the different countries.
I spent so much of my childhood doing that, but I know that you spent more.
Well, yeah, and also we had the 1974, we never replaced it, so into the 80s I thought there were countries called French West Africa and things like that. and that All in the Family was America's most popular TV show. No, but I would, and I write about this in the book, I would read the H volume to read the very pitifully short entry on homosexuality. It was right between Hominem and the Syrian city of Homs. And I would read it over and over again. And I think kind of hoping that
the section would get bigger at some point?
Yeah, that another line would magically appear, telling me something.
Now, how old were you when you started doing that?
I started doing that probably when I was 9 or 10, reading
that.
Right,
so because as a voracious reader, then you probably knew more about what that was earlier than most people in your
maybe.
shoes.
I mean, I think when I started reading that entry, I intuitively knew it was about me. But I didn't explicitly understand that. So, and the reason it's in the book is because it's in a section called Death of a Diagnosis, because 1974 just happened to be the year that the membership of the American Psychiatric Association ratified the decision to remove homosexuality from the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which still is the catalog of mental illnesses.
Absolutely, although they're up to like volume 6 now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and so
that was the DSM-3, I think.
Right. I think that's right. When I saw that happened, the leadership voted in '73, but it was removed in '74, and I thought, well, that was the year we got that encyclopedia, and I looked for personal connections in writing about these different deaths and passings.
Fantastic. Let me ask you one question. You might not be able to get this right. What do you know about the holiday, the Ocho de Diciembre?
Well, the Ocho de Diciembre is the day that I threw a party that I'm very proud to have thrown a party for you and Jeannie for your engagement.
You threw an engagement party for me and Jeannie. But what you did is, because you invented an ancient holiday and wrote all these stories about how it started in medieval times or Renaissance times.
Right, that's right.
And festooned the elevator up to the apartment where we were having this with these stories for people to read.
Right.
And explained why we were celebrating this day in fictitious terms, on the way to also explaining why the signature cocktail of the party was do you remember what it was?
It was a pomegranate
So close. Yes, you're there. Come on.
It wasn't a pomegranate margarita.
It was not.
It was a pomegranate. What did it involve? Pomegranate and...
It was a pomegranate mojito.
Oh, pomegranate mojito.
It was delicious.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm eternally grateful for that party.
Well,
that was one of the little, things I wanted to festoon through this. Who do you want to talk about next? There were so many good chapters. You said nobody's been asking you about Lawrence Welk.
Right.
I got to say that had you not said that, I would not have asked you about Lawrence Welk.
I wanted to write about Lawrence Welk because I find it interesting, and maybe this is more about myself than I realize. I find it interesting people later in life who, I guess, stand their ground. I'll explain what I mean. The story of Lawrence Welk is very interesting to me because he's on the road for decades playing music.
Right.
He's close to 50.
With the Hotsy Totsy Boys.
Exactly. As racy as he ever got was the name of that band at that point. And close to the age of 50, he gets a TV show actually on KTLA. It quickly goes national. ABC has him on. And he's developed this genre called champagne music at this point. He has his musical family, and the network wants him to have an edgy warm-up comic. The network wants him to have outside guest stars. Like, if anyone remembers Lawrence Welk, it was hermetically sealed. It was the stars on that, the people on that never appeared elsewhere, and vice versa.
Awful.
Okay, and I like the chandeliers. You got at least they have great chandeliers. But
if you like chandeliers, which I don't.
Well, okay, but it was like
go on.
It was like a wedding reception happening on another planet. All right, and
it really was that.
It was that. And so ABC, and so they didn't like the quirky regionalism of the show. They didn't like that he always mentioned where singers and acts were from. He always favored North Dakota because he had been born in a sod house in North Dakota and didn't speak English until he was 23. It was a German-speaking enclave. And ABC eventually canned him as part of something called the Rural Purge, which is in the early 70s. It started at CBS when they decided country-themed programming had to get out. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a bad thing because it led the way to the great Norman Lear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but then ABC, it sort of spread over to ABC, and they canned Lawrence Welk, and then Lawrence Welk went in, he basically said, I'm going to keep doing my show, and became even more popular. For 11,
syndication.
Right, for 11 more years. And by the time he died, excuse me, I'm not getting choked up about Lawrence Welk. I actually did so.
And I'm not, but I really love seeing this.
I'm not getting choked up. I had something in my throat. By the time he died, he had the second longest, he had the longest running musical variety show in history. And
still, to me, arguably the worst.
Well, all right, but listen.
Because you don't in your chapter really talk about his music.
I don't talk about his music, and I do talk about when my grandmother would watch, and I interviewed Fred Armisen for it because he had imitated Lawrence Welk on SNL.
That's right.
And Fred really liked him, and we both had similar experiences. Family members that watched it, not like appointment viewing, but it was just on because it was pleasant. And pleasant is important, and pleasant can be nice, and it doesn't have to, and there's great value in that. And Fred actually compared it to watching HGTV. Like, there's value in just something that's on and is pleasant. And Lawrence Welk himself would say, all you nice people, I hope you have a pleasant evening.
Yeah.
So
I get it. In that way, he was sort of a human Yule log.
Okay, he was a human Yule log.
But I don't watch that either.
He was a human Yule log, but he was
He's a screensaver.
Fine, but he was a screensaver and a human Yule log, but he was a badass because he knew what he did, and he knew that the audience liked it, and that's all that mattered. And
that's right. And he did, and I do see that.
Yeah, I admire that.
Yeah. But let me suggest to you Exotica and Tiki as another possible thing that went away that is fascinating.
Oh, tell me about that.
I'm not going to tell you about it because I'm interviewing you. But I did write a show recently for a guy who wanted to present a night of that music. Tiki and Exotica and stuff like that, and lounge music and stuff. Oh, and it is fascinating. What did you think I said?
I thought you said Exotica antiquing. And I was like, going to Pier 1?
So that's why you were interested.
I would love one of those chairs that's like
Tiki culture, look into it.
Right.
Beachcomber, what was his name? Bob the Beachcomber.
Okay.
Yeah, look into it, just saying. Don the Beachcomber, thank you, L.A. Because Don the Beachcomber he was the only person, I think, who founded a culture completely on his own.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was Exotica.
Tiki.
Right.
Exotica
Okay.
became one of the associated music genres within that culture.
Okay.
Yeah, just look into it. That's all I'm saying.
We're at the Aratani Theater. They could host that.
Let's see. Who do we want to talk about? You have this section about Died the Same Day.
Yes, I love the
I
whole
love
stuff.
Died the Same Day.
I think, look, first of all, Sammy Davis Jr. and Jim Henson died on the same day. I think
Which leads to the Sammy Davis Jr. chapter, which
Right.
is wonderful.
Well,
beautiful
thank
chapter.
you. I think the timing was really bad. I think that's too much talent to die in one day. They needed their own news cycle. Annette Funicello and Margaret Thatcher died on the same day.
Yeah. Similar hair.
Right. And I like to imagine in the afterlife like a kind of Freaky Friday, like role switch for the two. Margaret Thatcher
That would be a
starring
tough movie to pitch.
You're right. Margaret Thatcher starring in How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, which is an actual title that Annette Funicello was in.
Absolutely.
And then of course Farrah Fawcett dying on the same day as Michael Jackson. I think part of what's interesting about that is it kind of highlights the randomness of death.
Yes.
But my book is about life. I'm not interested in death. I'm
Well, that's
interested
another
in
thing that should be said about your book and your podcast.
Yeah.
And it's why I made that my grandmother's ravioli connection, is
Right.
that although death is arguably not only a dark, but the darkest subject,
Sure.
the book and the podcast is full of nothing but light. It's just delightful all the way through,
thank you.
even though we know how all these stories end.
Exactly.
Just by the very title of it. Oh, one more of the Died the Same Day that I just love, and I don't know if you want to tell the story or not.
Sure.
Cecil B. DeMille.
Oh.
And Carl Alfalfa Switzer.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of interesting to me, the death of Alfalfa and Cecil B. DeMille happening on the same day, because, there's no way that Alfalfa was on the front page. It was a dispute. He was training hunting dogs, and there was a dispute over a rental fee for a dog or something, and someone shot and killed him. It's terrible. And Cecil B. DeMille had been this giant. And actually, Alfalfa's last role was as an extra in the Ten Commandments. So
That's the thing.
Right.
They're one collaboration, and then they both die on the same day.
Right. But what's interesting to me is I think that Alfalfa is more fondly remembered than Cecil B. DeMille.
I agree. I mean, I think people still watch that one collaboration once a year, but most of Cecil B. DeMille's work has kind of faded away.
Right. I think that's
Whereas
right.
Little Rascals still airs.
Yeah. Now, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the second Darren, because in the TV show Bewitched,
Okay.
there were, yes, there is a real second Darren constituency in this audience.
That's good to see. That's good to see. Makes you feel good.
There was, as you know, there was Dick York, who I think was like Jim Carrey good. He was really good.
And then a little Dick York constituency.
Right, exactly. Ooh, this is like Bloods and Crips. Okay.
They were very different people.
So Dick York was replaced by Dick Sargent. So there was two different Dicks who played Darren, but obviously you never forget your first Darren, because after they switched Dicks and went to a second Darren, the ratings plunged because he just wasn't as good. And so the ancillary characters who we all love, like Agnes Moorehead and Paul Lynde, had to take up more of the slack because he was sort of a weak center.
I am happy with them taking up more of the slack, by the way.
They were great, but it really is an imbalanced meal. It's like all side dishes instead of a really decent entree.
Yeah, I hear you.
When you have a Darren who can't hold the center.
When you have all the wacky characters having to take over.
Exactly, that's what happens. And so, but Dick Sargent was clearly a really good guy. He was good friends with Elizabeth Montgomery. He came out late in life and became an early gay rights activist. And then he dies on the day when finally the second lesser Darren should get some love. He dies on the same day as Kim Il-sung, the founding dictator of North Korea. Oh. So I just feel badly. I feel
Was he dear leader or dear father or something?
He's great leader, I think.
Great leader, dear leader.
Then
now, whatever.
Chubby guy.
Chubby
whatever.
guy,
yeah. I'm not fat shaming the leader of North Korea, but if you're going to fat shame anyone, you can.
I just flashed to something. What year was that death? Do you remember?
The year that I cannot tell you right.
It was in the 90s.
Okay.
The reason I remember is because around that time, you and I were sharing that office in the Wobulous World of Dr. Seuss, and North Korea took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, and you were so taken with it, you put it on the wall of our office.
Oh, I did.
It was something like, it said something like, Kim Jong-il is the lodestone for the new age, or
Right.
something like that.
Well, I guess maybe writing about Dick Sargent is a kind of guilt abatement, because back then I was giving all my attention to the North Korean
Yeah,
leader.
you never mentioned. I shared an office with you. You never mentioned Dick Sargent.
I never
to me.
mentioned the passing of Dick Sargent, but
Not once.
I've grown since then.
Not once. I guess you have. Let's see. There was another personal detail I wanted to bring. Oh, you hosted my book party.
Yes, I did.
You threw me a book party.
Yes,
Thank you for that.
I'm happy that I did that.
Yeah,
And
that was a great time.
Yeah, and there was a balcony at that time in that apartment, and it was wonderful. You could go inside, you could go outside, and it was a wonderful book, Schrodinger's book.
Yeah. Okay. Now you end your book with a really touching chapter about your dad.
Yes, I did.
And it resonated with me in a way that I'll explain in a minute or two.
Okay. I did not plan to write about my father in this book, and I found myself, when I was writing about all these topics that were interesting to me, I found that I was thinking about him all the time, a lot of the time, most of the time, and how many of the things that I like came from him. And on Father's Day, this past Father's Day, I started writing about him. And then my editor, Emily Graff, said, you should make that an obituary, make it the close of the book. And I did, and made it the dedication.
It's wonderful.
And, well, thank you. And I found my father was somebody who used words like delightful and marvelous. He didn't like when I used the word incredible, because he said incredible means not to be believed, and that TV show That's Incredible had ruined that word.
Oh, that's your dad, all right.
Right. And so, I found myself thinking, I would like these different parts of the book to delight him, and that is a motivation that I think is one that I'm happy with. I think that's as good as any.
But the chapter centers around the trumpet.
Yes.
So this is important.
So when my father was 50, for Christmas that year, my father had as a child played the trumpet, and he then gave it up. Life interfered. He got married. He had 3 children. He started a small business, but he regretted not sticking with the trumpet. And my mother, in 1979, went to downtown to Washington, D.C. with her mother, who was visiting from Colombia. My mother's Colombian, and she bought a trumpet at a pawn shop. And I distinctly remember my father opening on Christmas Day, 1979, when I was 10 years old, his opening up the trumpet and being so happy.
Yeah.
And every morning, weekday morning, he would, in the cellar of the house, he would work on scales and doing exercises and work on his embouchure, which is how the lips...
position your lips to make a sound, yeah.
Yeah, fit around the mouthpiece. It's very hard.
With the trumpet in particular, it's hard.
Right.
That word is used for several instruments, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very hard. And then in the evening, he would get home from work, and he would spend an hour playing Dixieland jazz in the trumpet.
It's amazing.
I would put on metal roller skates that could fit over my sneakers, and I would skate around. There was a pole in the middle of the basement, and if I went by it quickly enough, I could feel like I was doing a salchow. And
grabbing the pole?
Yeah, and my mother doesn't like my sharing this detail, but it's in the book, which is that our dryer had crapped out in the mid-70s, and we didn't have one for a long time, so we would hang sheets and towels.
How long did you go without the dryer?
A long time. And so I would skate in between while he was playing Basin Street Blues or When the Saints Go Marching In.
That's great.
I think that...
And he had a band.
He and his buddies started a band called the Metrotones, and he would go to his jam session every Monday night, no matter what. And my father he did not think that he was going to be a star. He did not think he was going to end up playing at the Blue Note. He did it because he loved it, and it was an act of, extraordinary optimism to take up the trumpet at the age of 50 and to commit himself that way. And it meant a huge amount.
I so related to it because also, I don't know if you know, but dad bands are a thing now.
Are they really?
They're really a thing. It's easier to jam now than it used to be. Anybody in a dad band here? I am. Okay. And so around the age that your father was, I've started playing around in my neighborhood. With jamming in backyards with my fellow dads and occasionally playing community events and stuff.
And how does it make you feel?
Joyful.
Right.
It's the best thing. What your dad did was, I'm sure it was an incredibly important part of his life for as long as he did it.
I think it was, and he would play nursing homes, and he would play restaurants sometimes, but mostly retirement homes. But I think it made him more than sane, but that's important.
Sure.
But it made him happy.
Yeah, I loved reading it. Okay, here's something that you won't get in any of these other interviews. Tell everybody about how you maintained apartments in several American cities for no reason.
How I'm a slumlord.
Slumlord Mo.
No, I'm not. No,
he was not a slumlord, but I was his tenant.
You were my tenant.
I was. Me and Jeannie, when we moved out to L.A., because you had apartments in so many cities, you were like, oh, I've got one in L.A. We just have to get rid of my subletter.
Right.
Because you'd had it for quite a while at that point.
Yes, I did. Look, I didn't know where I was going to land. For a long time, I bounced around. So I had leases on different apartments. And
where were they?
I think in New York and in Los Angeles, and maybe I had one I had kept one in Dallas at the same time.
Oh, you had?
Yeah.
For years.
So it was 3 different time zones.
Yeah.
So it was good, just in case. When you're in your 20s, you had your bets, or at least I did.
I know. I think you told me. I think the way you described it when you first described it to me was like, I always want to have somewhere to flee to.
Gosh, yes, and now I have a panic room. So,
you have a panic room?
No, I don't.
But do you have any apartments? Are any of them left?
No, I live in New York. That's all I have. I have an apartment, and my mother lives in the same building as I do, which is great because we watch The Crown together. It's your filial duty to watch The Crown with your mother. I want everyone to know that.
Does that pick up in season 2?
Well, it's
I was only okay with season 1.
Yeah.
Except for the fog episode, I just loved.
Yeah.
To death.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah.
That was great. I thought season 2 was good, and
Okay.
I have high hopes for season 3.
Well, maybe we'll return to it.
I wonder if Meghan Markle will end up playing herself in season 8.
Oh, that would be great.
That'd be interesting.
I bet she'd be fantastic at it. Am I being signaled or not? I can't tell. Yes, I was being signaled. I just want to ask him one more thing, and I don't even know what it is. No, okay, I guess we can go to the Q&A. What?
Did you want to talk about the death of the belief in dragons?
Yes, let's do that, and then we'll get to the Q&A.
Alert.
No, but it's not a big spoiler because it's right up top in the book.
Well, yeah, no,
people used to think dragons existed.
Well, this is the kind of fun thread to pull for me. For this book, I was listening to an audiobook biography of Thomas Paine. And just one sentence, and I don't even remember the context in which it came up. The author, Craig Nelson, not to be confused with the star of Coach, but anyway.
That could be another section in the next book.
Yes.
People with the same name, because you do mention the bass player for Led Zeppelin.
John Paul Jones.
Yes.
Their father of the American Navy, bass player for Led Zeppelin, contestant on The Bachelorette, John Paul Jones.
Did not know that last one, okay.
Yeah. And I just learned, I didn't realize that Jethro Tull was a real person.
Yes,
He
I knew that.
invented the mechanical seed drill.
Yes.
Okay, but what were we saying?
I can't believe I knew a factoid you did not.
Well, no, you know plenty of factoids. And so there was this one detail in this Tom Paine biography about a man named Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist, and I loved biology in high school, and I loved to memorize my Linnaean taxonomies. But this guy...
He invented the taxonomy system,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in 1735, he went to Hamburg, which was then...
In fact, he was technically Linnaeus.
Probably.
Yeah,
and King Philip came over for good spaghetti, right?
On Wednesdays?
Kingdom, phylum, King Philip, class, came up, order, family... Genus, species. That's how King Philip came over for good for spaghetti.
I'd never even heard that mnemonic device. That's fantastic.
Is there a cash prize at the end of this?
Yes, there is. Tell him what he's won, Ted.
So, anyway, I just loved this detail that there was this exhibit of a 7-headed hydra in Hamburg, and everyone was going nuts over it. It was like a Picasso show at MoMA. I mean, everybody wanted to get into this thing, or LACMA, I should say. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, or at the Getty, and he went there and he looked at it and he said, "This is a bunch of snake skins sewn together with a weasel skull and some monkey guts
and
stuffed
not the same
in there."
snakes either, different species.
Right, different. Yeah. And
Shoddy.
pretty rapidly, this belief that had existed for millennia that dragons and their ilk were real was disabused.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
and that term slaying the dragon was absolutely something that you point to.
That he did.
He figuratively slayed the dragon.
Exactly.
Which, by the way, is also a term used in television nowadays.
What does that mean?
In procedural dramas, the dragon slaying scene, the scene where you slay the dragon, comes 35 minutes into the show.
Oh, I didn't
It's
know.
where somebody gives a crucial piece of evidence to the detectives that eventually leads to the capture of the criminal.
Did we miss the slaying the dragon moment in this interview?
We probably did. We're supposed to stop now. I just point that out because your friend and my wife, Jeannie Simpson, was the dragon slayer in an episode of Special Victims Unit, Law and Order.
Awesome. I'd love that.
But yes, it's true. All right. Now, that said, let's
Are there
open this up to a
questions? I love
Q&A.
questions.
I'm sorry?
I'd love questions.
We're going to do questions now.
Great, we love questions too. And questions at Live Talks LA typically start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short. There is no such thing as a two-part question. And tonight, only Adam Felber gets to ask the follow-up questions.
Excellent.
Who would like to go first?
Mo, my question is, which person would you least want to die on the same day as you?
Oh, that's a great question.
Which person?
Would you least want to die on the same day? Now, one consideration here is the person who would upstage you most.
Right.
That's one. Or just
you know what? I would not want that kid who plays young Sheldon dying on the same day as me.
Why not?
Because first of all, it would be a tragedy. He's too young.
Right.
Yes, and
Well, you don't know. You might live a lot longer.
You're right. But even if I live till 100,
Yeah.
it still would be anyway. But I just foresee great things for him, and I think that I just want him to just stay on his own day. So that's one person.
That's so selfless of you. You don't want him to have to share the day with you.
I don't want to be eclipsed. I don't want to be overshadowed. I don't
see.
want to be overshadowed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's a good answer.
I think it's a great question. You want dying on the same day.
That's terrific. Let's get another one.
I'm just curious because you relatively recently interviewed President Carter. Is he? I mean, I know this is a light topic for every. You're wonderful, by the way. But
That sounds like a throw-in, but anyway.
I mean, he's such a sage person about what's going on right now. Is there anything you could share with us?
That he said.
About the current political situation?
You know, he didn't say, you know, the thing I found about him is that he only spoke about his brother, and I'd been told by other people who've interviewed him, including a journalist, Jonathan Alter, who's writing a big book about him, that he's very candid. And so we didn't talk about politics, but it was interesting the way he talked about his brother. He clearly loved his brother, but he also didn't appreciate the distraction that his brother created, you know, in the run-up to the 1980 campaign, and you know, he's very real because he managed to express that, but also make clear how much he loved his brother.
That's great. He did not talk anything about the current politics.
No.
I think his feelings about that, though, are pretty well known.
They're pretty clear.
Yeah,
he
he's
gave
not
an
a...
interview the other day about that.
Yeah, all right, let's take another.
Hi, I hear you. I see you in the back. Yeah.
Hi. So, loving this, enjoying everything. But if somebody asked me who, alive or dead, 5 people I want at my dinner table, you would be one of them. But who would you want?
Thank you. Oh,
Who would I want at my dinner table, alive or dead?
I don't think you'd want anybody dead at your dinner party, would you?
Oh, right. I don't want that. That could just because then I'd have to be brought in for questioning. Who would I want alive, who's either alive or from the past at a dinner party? I get to have 5. Oh boy, maybe like. I just suddenly thought of like maybe all the great past Dolly Levi's at once. No, Pearl Bailey, Carol Channing, Ethel Merman, Mary
that's
Martin.
Great. You'd have a theme best of, but no.
Yeah, a
But
theme.
Let's just choose one.
We'd have to eat at that restaurant, right, where they eat the what is it? The gardens, Harmonia Gardens, right? So this is the Dolly section. the audience, the musical theater section.
There had to be one.
I'd have to think about that more. I mean,
How about you take the people from your book or your podcast?
Sure.
Take one of those. Let's
Well, I
focus it
think
in.
it would be really interesting to have like Tom Paine and Farrah Fawcett together. I think that would. I'd love to take a road trip.
Now,
with
you
Tom.
Tom Paine sounded so disagreeable in that.
He is, but he says what's on his mind, and I bet that it would just be interesting, like the dynamic between Tom Paine and Farrah. I'd like to get Tom Paine, Farrah, and maybe Lawrence Welk in a station wagon and drive across the country.
Wow.
And
You just threw in Lawrence Welk to get at me. You don't want to spend a minute with that guy.
Somebody has to control the music.
Right, so definitely not him.
And I think one of the pioneering black congressmen of Reconstruction. I mean, these guys were amazing.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They were. That was a really interesting detail in the book. All these black congressmen suddenly were there, and then suddenly were kind of Jim Crow'd out of there.
Yeah, I am very interested in these little pockets of history that are forgotten. You know, there's a Currier and Ives print from 1872 of these 6 men, one of whom is a sitting senator, 5 are House members. More than half of them, 7 years before, had been slaves, had been enslaved, and now they're walking the halls of Congress. So
I've never seen that. My mom collected Currier and Ives.
It's an amazing image. And so just in the 1870s alone, 14 African American men were elected to the House of Representatives, and it's largely forgotten. But it's when you look at something like that, you think, you know, Reconstruction is a failed period. Well, you can certainly argue that, but then you look at that and you think, oh my God, how much hope there was. And
yeah. And how much was dashed. It counts as a follow-up, Ted, because he mentioned Farrah Fawcett. You mentioned in your book that you used to play Charlie's Angels.
Yeah.
Who were you? You don't mention.
Well, I don't mention. It's interesting. I didn't want to disclose that.
Because your friend Jeannie Simpson also used to play Charlie's Angels and was in the fan club.
Well, I think probably, look, I think people wanted to be Jill, wanted to be the Farrah Fawcett. That was like a coveted role. And I probably, and I want to be clear, by the way, they were all smart. I don't like when people say the smart one.
No, Jill was smart.
They all are smart in different ways. Sabrina, the Kate Jackson, was like STEM smart, like science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah,
but like the others were smart in different ways.
Street smarts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe I tried.
You're not gonna say?
It's street smart. Maybe I tried to be different, and I was Tiffany, the Shelley Hack one from season 4.
No.
Because
that's a good answer. It's probably not the true one.
Let's
take another question.
Hi, Mo.
Yes.
Hi. As a historian,
We'll get you right after her.
sorry. As a historian, I'm grateful for your making history accessible and funny to people. And speaking of forgotten pockets of history, do you know anything about Henry Ford's love child?
Well, and by the way, I'm not sure that this was mentioned in my intro. No, and that's fine. I host a show on Saturday mornings called the Henry Ford's Innovation Nation, a show that I love doing in part because I end up learning so much by hosting it. It's out of the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, which if you've never been, it's extraordinary. I grew up in DC with the Smithsonian, and this museum totally is like of that rank. I mean, it's a really special place.
Kind of like the Science and Technology Museum in the Smithsonian, I'm guessing.
Yeah, like Air and Space, right? And but it's an extraordinary place. I did not know anything. We haven't done an episode yet on Henry Ford's love child. So,
do you know anything about it?
Can you tell us?
I mean, because that's either fascinating or some kind of weird conspiracy theory.
No, it's really good. There's apparently a mansion next to where you taped the show that was set up for his lover and the child, and he had this whole fiction created with one of his employees. I'll tell you about it later on.
Yeah,
I would love for you.
Wow, that's interesting. You might have just fostered an episode. All right, I'm sorry, Ted, to take away the helm from you, but I did promise right over here.
A little bit different direction. I really found it funny when you were doing the cooking show.
Thank you.
It's a great show.
The grandmothers who would chastise you for your own cooking skills. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences?
So she's asking me about doing this show, My Grandmother's Ravioli, where I went around the country learning how to cook from grandmothers and grandfathers in their kitchens. And I did it for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I didn't know how to cook. I actually still don't, really. And
Really? After
and-
all that? You did like
yeah.
2 or 3 seasons, didn't you?
4 seasons.
4 seasons.
But I also, in my experience, when you're interviewing somebody and they're doing an activity, certainly something that they like, they kind of lose themselves more. I love doing the show. I specifically wanted grandparents who didn't really want to be on TV. No one was trying to sell anything, and like the typical kind of audition would be, you know, in the case of the Peggy, the Irish grandmother in New Jersey, her neighbor came over and filmed her, and she was with her golden retriever, and she basically was saying like, you know, what's a Morocco? What do you want from me? And I thought we want her.
That's ours, yes.
Yeah, that's what we want.
That's very interesting because nowadays everybody knows how to be on TV.
Right.
And if you watch old TV, like Kinescopes and stuff, when you get people from the crowd on TV, they were completely different than people today who are all camera ready.
Yeah, and look, and I think the depressing truth is that people who don't desperately want to be on TV are often better at being on TV than people who make a living at it.
But talk about these women. I think she wanted to know about you being corrected.
Oh, being chastised.
Or being a great disappointment.
Yeah, I liked that. I liked when they were, I mean, I wanted to go to them. I didn't want them to play up to me. So if they scolded me, that was good. I mean, Cookie Oma, the German grandmother, I mean, she kind of kicked my ass. I mean, like, so I loved that. It was a great experience for me, and it was also interesting to be with people in that stage of their lives who kind of sort of, you know, they could really articulate their values, and you know, they at that point in life, and it was a blast, and I'm so glad that it was a tiny channel, and the number of people that watched it makes me very happy. So thank you.
I just want to say I love you both on Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Oh, thank you.
But I was wondering, Mo, when you were writing the book, were there any obituaries that you had to cut out of it that you wish you could have gotten into it?
Well, one is Nellie Bly, because I had an idea for it and it didn't really work, and I just frankly ran out of time. So that's one that if there's a sequel, I'd like to do. Another was about Our Bodies, Ourselves, because it went out of print for the first time since its initial run. So that's another one I'd like to return to. And then a forgotten forerunner that I was interested in was John Hughes, not the John Hughes you think it is. This is a bishop in the 19th century who was responsible for the building of St. Patrick's Cathedral, but even more importantly, the Irish were really the bottom of the rung at this point on the East Coast and in New York City, and he really fought for their rights, and the next generation ended up being cops and teachers, and it was a kind of a stunning turnaround for a whole population of immigrants. So those are ones that were on the cutting room floor. Yeah.
Well, you could definitely get John Hughes and John Hughes in it.
Exactly, yeah. And Jethro Tull and Jethro Tull.
There you go.
Yeah.
Couple more questions?
And you had, John, you had one?
In writing this, I know it takes a lot of time and research and effort, but when you write, it's a process where you discover things about yourself. What did you discover about yourself in writing this book?
Well, what did I discover about myself in writing this book? I discovered, this is going to sound awfully virtuous, but I've discovered that I like being generous with people. I think that there is, and Frank Bruni from the New York Times.
Lawrence Welk was a beneficiary of that.
Right, it's a beneficiary. Frank Bruni from the New York Times wrote a nice little thing about the book, and he made this great point that I hadn't thought of. He said obituaries are the one part of the newspaper journalism where it's still acceptable to err on the side of generous, and that's what I wanted to do. I did a piece recently with Doris Kearns Goodwin and David McCullough that hasn't aired yet for CBS Sunday Morning. It aired in some markets, but it was preempted for a press conference in most markets. But we talked about this idea of cutting the past some slack, and being, rather than disqualifying people for single reasons, it depends what they are, looking at the totality of a person. And Doris Kearns Goodwin used this great example. She said, look, Franklin Delano Roosevelt should have allowed more Jewish refugees into the country in before World War II. The internment of Japanese Americans was a really terrible thing, a great stain. He also got us through World War II and the Great Depression. And so that doesn't directly answer your question, but I found myself thinking, I like being generous and giving people the benefit of the doubt and writing about the past.
Increasingly a rare quality now that should be thought about.
I think it is, and I think it's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else? Before we part company, everybody, you got some good news this afternoon.
Oh,
I didn't want to bury the lead, but do you want to tell people, or can I tell them? Or
tell them, yeah.
As of now, when did your book come out?
It came out on November 5th.
November 5th, so a week ago.
Yeah.
As of this afternoon, Mobituaries is number 13 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yes, I'm excited.
Yeah, that's just amazing.
Yeah. So I get to.
And let me just add to that. See if I can bring it up into the top 10 by saying you should give this to everybody you know for Christmas, because I guarantee you nobody will not want to have this book in their house. It's delightful. It's well laid out.
Thank you, man. Thanks.
Mo Rocca, everybody.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you, man.